The heart of a blacksmith shop would be the forge. The forge is where your heat is going to be confined and heat your steel or your iron up. Now, we're going to use coal to heat today, and the coal we call is green coal. We don't call this green coal because of the color. We call it because it's in its raw form. It has not been cooked. Once we cook it, it turns into coke. And this coke is what's producing the heat to get our steel up to 2,000 degrees. And once this coke burns up, it leaves a little ash called clinkers. And this has to be cleaned out of your forge every now and then, or it stops up the airflow. The airflow is controlled by what's known as bellows. These bellows, think of them as a big lung that is pumping air and blowing into the bottom of your fire to get it hot. We're used to seeing fires burn on the top and a little bit of air, and it gets, you know, like a campfire, it gets warm from it. You can get warm from it, but this blows from the bottom and it's pushing the air into the fire to make it blow a constant heat. All right, when I pump the handle, watch the yellow ribbon and you'll see the air moving around it. And as I pump it, the air is forced from the bellows through a pipe through the bottom of your fire pot, and it blows. And that's what's, the air is coming up. And our fire will be concentrated in here with the air blowing on it to make it hotter. Moving from the forge, let's look at some tools that I'm going to use. Today we're going to make just a nail, and it's very simple. But the tools you need are tongs, and there are all sorts of tongs. I've got two sets here. These are the ones we'll be using to hold the steel to make the nail, and these are just to show you that there are different styles for holding different material. You have, of course, the hammer. You have a special tool known as a header, a nail header, and you'll see this used. You have a hardy cutoff tool. You'll see this used. It fits in the hardy hole, and that gives you a cutter. I'm going to use a piece of soapstone to mark the steel so you can understand how we measure it. And then you have the anvil is our heart of our workstation. We'll be working off the anvil. This is the horn, the heel, and this is the main section. We've got one other tool, is the vise, and it's used to hold the metal where we can do work off of it with a file. You can file your work, it holds it for you and lets you free up your hands. All right, let's start the forge. All right, since we are doing things the colonial way at Bethabara, we're going to use flint and steel to start a fire with. Now, this is also a flint steel striker that the blacksmith would have made. So what we're going to try to get this to... And what I'm looking for is to get a little burning edge. We'll put it in our little basket of material. And we'll get it going. And then we'll start slowly putting a little air in it to get the fire going. And moving a little coal into it once it gets going. And what I'm looking for when I'm doing this, I'm actually looking, if you see white smoke, that's some of the kindling and all burning, I'm looking for that smoke to turn to a yellow. When it turns to yellow, that means I'm starting to heat my coal and getting it hot, getting my coal burning. All right, we're coking our fire up. The coal has burned down and into coke, and the coke is the orange glow you see in the bottom here. You've also noticed that we do have still some of the yellowish smoke coming up. That is still green coal being burned off to make our coke. So let's heat a piece of steel up. We're going to heat it up to 2,000 degrees, We don't have a real way of checking the temperature, so what we do, we go by color. And we'll get our piece of little steel here. We're going to start out with a 1/4 inch piece of steel. It's hard. We're going to stick it in our tongs. We're going to put it in the fire. Now, one thing about steel or iron, and it's cold, look at it like being Play-Doh. Play-Doh, you can twist, bend, make all kind of shapes out of it, but once it hardens, it's hardened. That's kind of the way steel is. Once we get this steel up to 2,000 degrees, it will be able to be hammered, be able to twisted, whatever we need to do with it. Then when it cools, it retains that shape. And your first heat is always your longest heat because your steel has to get hot. I'm holding this like, think of your tongs, and I'm holding my hand like a big pair of pliers that are specially made for this. So the time it takes to do this, it kind of gives you an idea of the time it took back in the colonial days to make things. It was not a fast process by any means. We're used to a push button mechanized industries that they didn't have back then. This was about as mechanized as you got on the frontier. All right, we're coming up to heat. We got a pretty good orange on it right now. So let's go ahead and we'll start working it. The first thing I'm going to do, bring it to a point. All right, for our first heat, we've already brought it to a point. And this may not look hot right now, but this is actually called black heat. This is where most people get burned because it's still, even though it's lost that color, it's still hot enough to burn the wood. It'll burn you. All right, back in the fire we go. And we'll heat it again. And we'll start working that point out to a long taper. One thing working out in the daylight like this, it kind of makes it hard to see, especially if it's a real sunny day. If you ever seen a lot of old TV shows of blacksmith shops have shown, they're traditionally pretty dark. That was on purpose. That was where you could see the color of the metal easier. All right, coming out. And we'll do this slow. We'll take a couple heats. And we'll work this taper down. And you can start seeing the nail taking the taper form on it. All right, back in the fire. We'll heat it again. All right, so it's, then we'll measure it out. Straighten it up. Then we're going to take our nail header. We're going to kind of measure it, see how long a nail we got. We can make that just a little bit longer. We're going to put it back in there. All right, here we go again. One last time. We're going to stick it in here. Soapstone, I showed you the soapstone. Here's where we use it. We'll come in here and put a couple marks. You can see that white mark, that's kind of a reference line. Normally I don't do this, but on a demo, it's good so people kind of see what's going on. I'm going to cut it. My ideal thing is to not cut it completely off, because then it's hard to hold in the fire. As long as I got it held right there, I'm pretty good shape to put it back in the fire, and I don't have to chase that little nail everywhere. And it will get lost in that fire. And we'll heat it up. And our next step is going to be to put the head on it. All right, let's break it off. There's my nail. We're going to hit it. All right, there's our nail. Now, we just drove extremely hot steel into here, and when steel's hot, it expands. So to get that nail out, if I try to beat that nail out right now, it's just going to bend over. So what we're going to do, we're going to reach over here. We're going to cool it. Pop it out, and there's your nail. All right, just to show you how hot a forge can get, we're going to try to burn a piece of steel in this forge. That is not something you want to make a habit of doing. Burning steel, imagine how much time it took me to make that one nail. And now I get busy talking or I'm not paying attention. I leave my steel in the fire and I'm not paying it a bit of attention in the world. Let's just see how long it takes it to burn. And this fire's not got hot yet. It's still what I consider a cold fire. So it may take a few minutes to do it. Normally in 45 seconds I can burn a piece of steel up in this forge. All right, we're just now starting to burn. And I'll give it a little bit more so we can see it good. I'm gonna pull it out, and for a brief second it's gonna look like a sparkler on the end. That is the carbon in the steel burning. This fire has reached about 3,000 degrees now. Just a little bit hotter so it'll stay burning longer. There it is. All right, the carbon in the steel has actually burned and it started melting. This is what your steel looks like when you burn it. This is not a desirable quality in your work whatsoever. All right, common questions that I'm asked. Where did the iron come from? Well, in the colonial days, the colonies were taking iron ore, putting it in the bottom of ships for what they call ballast. They sailed the ships to England, and over in England they processed the iron in the iron bar, shipped it back to America, and we would import it either from Charleston or from Wilmington in this area. About the time of the colonial American Revolution and colonial times, there were starting to be more ironworks in North America or in the colonies, and our closest one is going to be Franklin County, Virginia, Washington Iron Works, and it started in 1776. Notice the name, Washington. Another question I'm often asked is, where do blacksmiths get their name? Well, you look at my hands and I'm nice and dirty, black, and if I wipe my face, you get blacksmith face. But getting dirty is not where we got our name from, even though that's a good answer and a common answer. Blacksmiths got their name from the metal they worked, iron, black iron. It was black, so therefore they got blacksmiths. Just like you have goldsmith and silversmiths, you have blacksmiths. Another common question is, how did somebody learn this trade? Here at Bethabara, they had apprentices. Most colonies and most blacksmiths had apprentices. The apprentice program was set up where a young boy of about 13 years old would come into a blacksmith shop, and for room, board, and learn the trade, he worked in the blacksmith shop for free. Now, with that said, most blacksmiths train them. They would also make sure they had one set of clothing, new clothing a year, but they would learn the trade, work under the blacksmith for about 5 or 6 years, and then if the blacksmith thought he was ready, he would be a journeyman, and from a journeyman he could go to be a master and be out on his own. So that's kind of a trade school with no money to change hands, just room and board and free work, or free labor. All right, we touched briefly on temperatures of metal. The metal, this got up probably above 3,000 degrees, but you learn the color of the metal for the temperature. Red being what everybody's used to hearing, red hot, all that. Red hot is the bottom scale of any heat we want to even deal with. We want to get above red. So the next level of heat would be orange. Orange is going to hit about 1,000 to 1,500 degrees. What I'm after to work, a good working heat, is 2,000 degrees, which would be yellow. Yellow is the next above orange. It is the working heat of a blacksmith. The next heat up is a white heat or a welding heat, which is real close to melting temperature. So that's how you tell. It's in the color of the metal. That's why out on a sunny day, it's very difficult to see the color of the metal. And that's why on a blacksmith shop, most of them were dark.